April 18, 1945, Northern Italy. Captain Charles McAllister sat in the left seat of his B-24 Liberator, Troubles Aberwin, leading his squadron toward the target. He was 23 years old. This was his 38th mission. 38 times he'd flown into enemy airspace. 38 times he brought his crew home. At 14,000 feet, the anti-aircraft fire found them. The German gunners on the ground knew where the bombers would be. They'd been fighting this war for years. They knew the altitudes, the speeds, the approach vectors. The flak came up in black clouds, explosions that shook the aircraft, shrapnel that tore through aluminum skin like paper. Troubles Aberwin took multiple hits. The number 3 engine exploded. Fuel lines ruptured. The aircraft shuddered and began losing altitude. Captain McAllister's voice came over the intercom, calm, steady. The voice his crew had learned to trust over dozens of missions. We're hit bad. Prepare to bail out. 10 men aboard. 10 men who trusted their pilot. 10 men who knew that when the order came to jump, they'd jump, because Captain McAllister had never let them down. But as the crew prepared to abandon the aircraft, 3 men discovered their parachutes wouldn't deploy properly. The static lines were jammed. The chutes wouldn't open. Without working parachutes, jumping meant certain death. Captain McAllister faced a choice. He could bail out, save himself. 7 men were already going over the side with good chutes. He'd done his duty. No one would blame him for leaving. Or he could stay at the controls, keep the plane as steady as possible. Give those 3 men time to fix their chutes or find spares, and in doing so, give up his own chance at survival. The choice he made in those final moments would define everything about what it means to command, about the sacred trust between an officer and his men, about the bond that forms when you fly into death together, mission after mission, and trust each other with your lives. This is the story of a young pilot from Pennsylvania who understood that leadership means sacrifice, that command means responsibility, that you don't leave your men behind, even when staying means you won't be coming home. This is the story of Captain Charles McAllister and the 3 men who lived, because he chose to die. Charles Brewster McAllister was born on June 14, 1921, in the small town of Uniontown, Pennsylvania. It was a coal mining town in the southwestern corner of the state, about 50 miles south of Pittsburgh. His father, Robert McAllister, worked in the mines. Hard work, dangerous work, the kind of work that aged men before their time. But it provided for a family, put food on the table, kept a roof overhead. Charles was the middle child of 3 boys. His older brother, Robert Jr., followed their father into the mines after high school. His younger brother, James, was still in school when Charles enlisted, according to family letters preserved by his sister-in-law. Charles was a quiet boy, thoughtful. He'd sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the sky. His mother used to say he was always looking up, wondering what was beyond the hills that surrounded their town. He did well in school, not the top of his class, but solid, reliable. His teachers remembered him as the kind of student who always completed his work, always showed up on time, never caused trouble. One teacher wrote in a letter after his death, Charles was the kind of boy you could count on. If he said he'd do something, he did it. He graduated from Uniontown High School in 1939. The war had already started in Europe. Germany had invaded Poland that September, but America wasn't involved yet. Charles got a job at the local garage, working as a mechanic's assistant. He was good with engines, patient, methodical. He liked understanding how things worked. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Charles was 20 years old. He was at home that Sunday, listening to the radio with his family when the news broke. According to his brother James, who was 15 at the time, Charles stood up immediately and said, "I'm going to enlist." His father asked him to wait, to think about it. Charles was working, helping support the family. The mines weren't hiring like they used to, and every bit of income helped. But Charles had made up his mind. The next morning, he went to the Army recruiting office in Uniontown. He wanted to fly. He'd always wanted to fly. As a boy, he'd watched the mail planes fly over Uniontown and imagined being up there, above the hills, seeing the world from above. Now he had a chance to do it, and a reason that mattered more than boyhood dreams. The recruiter tested him: math, mechanical aptitude, coordination, vision. Charles passed everything. He was accepted for pilot training, On January 15, 1942, Charles Brewster McAllister raised his right hand and swore the oath. He was inducted into the United States Army Air Forces. His mother cried when he left for training. His father shook his hand, told him to be careful, told him to come home. His brothers promised to write, and Charles promised to write back. He kept that promise. Throughout his training and throughout his combat tour, Charles wrote home regularly, short letters. Usually, nothing fancy. He'd tell them about the weather, about his training, about the food, about the men he was serving with. He never complained, never expressed doubt. He wrote the kind of letters that would reassure a mother that her son was doing fine. But in one letter, written during pilot training, he wrote something that his family kept and treasured. He wrote, "Mom, I know you worry. I worry too sometimes, but I believe I'm supposed to be here. I'm supposed to do this. Whatever happens, know that I'm doing what I think is right." Charles went through pilot training at multiple bases, primary training in Alabama, basic training in Georgia, advanced training in Texas. Each stage eliminated men who couldn't handle the pressure, the physical demands, the mental challenges of learning to fly military aircraft. Charles never struggled. He wasn't the flashiest pilot. He wasn't the one doing victory rolls over the airfield or buzzing the control tower, but his instructors noted that he was steady, reliable. He followed procedures. He didn't panic when things went wrong in training, and things always went wrong. Charles stayed calm and worked the problem. One instructor wrote in his evaluation, "Cadet McAllister will make an excellent aircraft commander. He has the temperament and judgment necessary for combat operations. Recommend assignment to multi-engine bombers." In November 1942, Charles graduated from pilot training and received his wings. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant. He was assigned to be for Liberators, 4-engine heavy bombers that would carry the war to the enemy. The B-24 was a complicated aircraft, difficult to fly, less forgiving than its more famous cousin, the B-17 Flying Fortress. It required constant attention, constant trim adjustments, constant coordination between the pilot and co-pilot. But it could carry a heavier bomb load, it could fly farther, and the Army Air Forces needed every B-24 they could get. Charles spent months in crew training, learning to fly the B-24 in formation, learning to navigate to targets hundreds of miles away, learning to coordinate with his bombardier, his navigator, his flight engineer, learning to trust his crew and teaching them to trust him. He was paired with a co-pilot, Lieutenant James Harrington from Oregon, a navigator, Lieutenant Robert Chen from California, a bombardier, Lieutenant Thomas Kowalski from Michigan, an engineer, Staff Sergeant William Davies from Wales. He'd emigrated to America in 1938 and enlisted after Pearl Harbor. Radio operator Sergeant Frank Martinez from Texas, and gunners, waist gunners, tail gunner, ball turret gunner, young men from all over America who'd volunteered to fly into combat. They became a crew, 10 men who would live together, fly together, and trust their lives to each other. In training, they learned each other's habits, learned who stayed calm under pressure and who needed encouragement, learned how to work as a single unit. Charles was the aircraft commander, the pilot, the leader, and according to later testimony from surviving crew members, he took that responsibility seriously. He didn't socialize much off duty. He wasn't unfriendly, just quiet. But when they were flying, he was completely focused, completely present. His crew learned that when Captain McAllister, he'd been promoted to captain in early 1944, gave an order, you followed it, because he'd thought it through, because he knew what he was doing, because he'd never let them down. In August 1944, Captain McAllister and his crew shipped out to Italy. They were assigned to the 15th Air Force 456th Bombardment Group, based at Stornar Airfield near Foggia, the Mediterranean theater, where American bombers flew missions over northern Italy, Austria, southern Germany, and the Balkans, attacking oil refineries, rail yards, factories, airfields, trying to cripple Germany's ability to wage war. It was dangerous work, very dangerous work. German anti-aircraft defenses were extensive. German fighters still prowled the skies. Bomber crews faced flak, fighters, mechanical failures, weather, and the simple fact that they were flying missions deep into enemy territory where one mistake, one mechanical failure, one well-aimed burst of flak could mean death. The odds weren't good. Bomber crews had to complete a tour, Originally 25 missions, later increased to 35, then 50. Before they could go home, many crews didn't make it. Empty bunks, missing aircraft, names scratched off the mission board. Captain McAllister and his crew flew their first mission in September 1944. They were terrified. Every crew was terrified on their first mission, but they did their jobs. They flew the mission, they bombed the target, they came home, and they did it again and again. By April 1945, Captain McAllister and his crew had flown 37 missions, 37 times into enemy airspace, 37 times facing flak and fighters, 37 times coming home. They bombed oil refineries in Ploesti, Romania, some of the most heavily defended targets in Europe. They'd hit rail yards in Austria, factories in northern Italy, airfields in Germany. Each mission brought them closer to completing their tour, closer to going home. The crew of Troubles Aberwin, they named their B-24 after a popular song, had become a tight unit. They knew each other's voices over the intercom, knew each other's habits, knew who could be counted on when things got rough. Captain McAllister continued writing home. His letters remained brief, reassuring. He told his family about Italy, the countryside, the weather, the Italian people they encountered. He mentioned his crew occasionally, good men. He wrote, "I'm lucky to fly with them." He didn't write about the fear, about watching other aircraft go down, about the friends who didn't come back, about the nights when he couldn't sleep because he kept seeing flak burst in his mind. That wasn't the kind of thing you wrote home about. That was the kind of thing you carried silently. On the evening of April 17th, 1945, the crews were briefed for the next day's mission. The target was a rail yard in northern Italy, near the Austrian border. German supplies were moving south through that yard. Ammunition, fuel, reinforcements. Destroying the yard would disrupt German logistics and support the Allied advance. It was considered a moderately dangerous mission. Flak was expected to be moderate to heavy. Fighter opposition was possible, but not likely. The Luftwaffe was running out of fuel and pilots by April 45. The biggest danger was the flak. Captain McAllister and his crew studied the target photos, studied the flak maps showing known anti-aircraft positions, studied the route in and the route out. They'd done this 37 times before, but you never got complacent. Complacency killed. After the briefing, the crews dispersed to prepare. Some men wrote letters, just in case. Some played cards. Some tried to sleep. Some went to the chapel. Captain McAllister, according to his co-pilot's later account, spent time checking over Troubles Aberwin, walking around the aircraft, talking to the ground crew chief, making sure everything was ready. He always did that before a mission. It was part of his routine, part of how he maintained control in an uncontrollable situation. The wake-up call came at 0400 hours, April 18th, 1945. The men dressed, ate breakfast. Some could eat, others couldn't, and gathered their gear. Parachutes, flight suits, Mae West life vests, heated suits for the cold at altitude. They rode trucks out to the hard stands where their aircraft waited in the pre-dawn darkness. The B-24 sat like sleeping giants. Ground crews had been working through the night, fueling and arming the aircraft, checking engines, loading bombs. Captain McAllister and his crew performed their pre-flight, checking control surfaces, checking engines, checking systems. Everything had to be perfect. Your life depended on it. At 0530, engines began starting across the field. The sound was tremendous. Dozens of aircraft starting their engines, the roar echoing off the hills, propellers turning, exhaust smoke drifting in the morning air. At 0600, the first aircraft began taking off, one after another, heavy with fuel and bombs. They lumbered down the runway and clawed their way into the air. It took time to get an entire group airborne and formed up. Time when everyone was vulnerable, aircraft circling the field at low altitude. Waiting for the formation to come together, Troubles Aberwin took off at 0-6-20-3, 10 men aboard. Captain McAllister in the left seat, Lieutenant Harrington, his co-pilot, in the right seat. The rest of the crew at their positions. They climbed to altitude and took their position in the formation. Captain McAllister would be leading a flight of 6 aircraft. He'd been promoted to flight leader after his 30th mission. Recognition of his skill and reliability, the formation headed north, climbing to bombing altitude, crossing the Adriatic Sea, then the Italian coastline. The Alps were visible in the distance, snow-covered peaks gleaming in the morning sun. It was a beautiful morning. clear skies, good visibility, the kind of morning where you could almost forget there was a war on. Almost as they approached the target area, the briefing officer's warning proved accurate. Flak began appearing, black puffs of smoke dotting the sky. German 88mm anti-aircraft guns firing from the ground. Each explosion sent shrapnel flying in all directions. All it took was one piece of shrapnel in the wrong place. Through a fuel tank, through a control cable, through a crew member, and you were in trouble. The formation tightened up. Standard procedure. Flying close formation made it harder for the flak to find gaps. The bombardiers were at their stations now, looking through their Norden bomb sights, preparing for the bomb run. The bomb run was the most dangerous part. For several minutes, you had to fly straight and level. No evasion, no maneuvering. The bombardier needed a steady platform to aim, so you flew straight into the flak and hoped. Captain McAllister's voice came over the intercom. Bombardier has control. Steady as she goes, Lieutenant Kowalski, the bombardier, was hunched over his bomb sight, making tiny adjustments. Watching the target approach, the math had to be perfect. Altitude, airspeed, wind, distance. Get one variable wrong and the bombs would miss. Around them, flak continued to burst. Closer now. The Germans had found their altitude, found their airspeed. The black puffs were tracking the formation. Bombs away, Kowalski said. The aircraft lurched upward as 6,000 pounds of bombs dropped free. The bomb bay doors closed. Captain McAllister's voice. Pilot has control. Coming left. The formation began its turn away from the target. Time to get out of the flak zone. Time to head home. They almost made it. The flak burst hit Troubles Aberwin at 14,000 feet. Just as the formation was clearing the target area, multiple explosions. Close to close. Shrapnel tore through the aircraft's right side. The number 3 engine, inboard right, exploded in flames. Fuel lines ruptured. The right wing was torn open. Aluminum skin peeled back. Internal structure exposed. The aircraft lurched violently. Captain McAllister fought the controls. The B-24 wanted to roll right, wanted to fall into a dive. He and Lieutenant Harrington wrestled with the yoke, trying to keep the wings level. Number 3 is on fire, the flight engineer. Sergeant Davies reported his station was just behind the pilots, where he could see all 4 engines. Fuel pressure dropping, oil pressure 0. She's losing power. Captain McAllister's voice remained calm. Feather number 3, activate fire suppression. The propeller on the burning engine stopped turning, the blades twisting. To reduce drag, fire suppression, carbon dioxide flooding the engine compartment, killed most of the flames. But the engine was destroyed, and the damage was worse than just one engine. Skipper, we're losing fuel. Sergeant Davies reported, fuel transfer system is damaged. We're venting fuel from the right wing tanks. That was bad. That was very bad. Losing fuel meant they might not make it back to base, might not even make it back to friendly territory. Troubles Aberwin was falling behind the formation. With one engine out and damage affecting lift and drag, they couldn't maintain speed. The rest of the formation was pulling away. Standard procedure. You didn't slow down for a damaged aircraft. Slowing down made the entire formation vulnerable. Within minutes, they were alone. One damaged B-24, struggling to stay airborne. Miles from base dock, Captain McAllister assessed the situation. They were over northern Italy, German-occupied territory. They had 3 engines running, but one was damaged and might fail. They were losing fuel. They were losing altitude. They dropped to 12,000 feet and couldn't climb back. Navigator, give me a heading for base, McAllister said. Lieutenant Chen, the navigator, worked his charts. Heading 170, skipper. Distance approximately 200 miles. 200 miles, with a damaged aircraft, losing fuel, losing altitude. It was going to be close, all crew. This is the pilot, McAllister said. We're heading home. Prepare for emergency landing procedures. Bombardier, jettison any remaining ordnance. Gunners, clear your weapons. We need to lighten the aircraft. The crew complied. Anything that could be thrown overboard went. Ammunition, equipment, anything not essential, every pound mattered. Now, for the next 20 minutes, they flew south, nursed the damaged aircraft through the sky. Captain McAllister and Lieutenant Harrington worked the controls constantly, compensating for the damaged wing, fighting to maintain altitude. They'd dropped to 10,000 feet. Then 9,000. The aircraft was slowly dying beneath them. "We're not going to make it to base," Lieutenant Harrington said quietly on the intercom. Only McAllister could hear him. "We need to think about bailing out." Captain McAllister didn't respond immediately. He was calculating. Distance, fuel, altitude, rate of descent. Harrington was right. They weren't going to make it. "All crew, this is the pilot," McAllister said. "Prepare to abandon aircraft. When I give the order, bail out immediately. We're still over enemy territory, so evade and head south." "Understood." Acknowledgements came back from each crew position. They trained for this, hoped they'd never have to do it, but they knew what to do. Captain McAllister waited. He wanted to get as far south as possible, give his crew the best chance of reaching friendly lines after they jumped. Every mile south was a mile closer to safety. They dropped to 8,000 feet, still losing altitude. The remaining engines were straining. At 7,000 feet, Captain McAllister made the decision. "All crew, bail out. Bail out now. Acknowledge." The acknowledgements came back, one by one. The navigator, the bombardier, the waist gunners, the tail gunner. They were going to the escape hatches, preparing to jump. In the ball turret, a rotating gun position on the aircraft's belly, Sergeant Anthony Romano cranked his turret around so he could get out. The ball turret was a death trap if the aircraft went down. You had to rotate it to the correct position to climb out into the fuselage. Then Sergeant Davies, the flight engineer, reported, "Skipper, we have a problem. 3 men have jammed chutes: Martinez, Romano, and Johnson. Their static lines won't release. They can't jump." Time stopped. 3 men with jammed parachutes. If they jumped, the chutes wouldn't open. They'd fall to their deaths. Captain McAllister understood immediately what this meant. Those 3 men needed time. Time to fix the jammed static lines or find spare chutes. Time the aircraft didn't have unless someone kept flying it. Kept it stable. Kept it in the air. If he and Lieutenant Harrington bailed out now, the aircraft would immediately go into a dive. The 3 men with jammed chutes would have no chance. They'd go down with the plane. Lieutenant Harrington understood too. "Sir," he said, waiting for orders. Captain Charles McAllister, 23 years old, looked at his instruments. Altitude, 6,500 feet. Rate of descent, 500 feet per minute. Fuel, almost empty. They had maybe 10 minutes before the engines quit entirely. 10 minutes. "Harrington, bail out," McAllister said quietly. "Sir, that's an order." "Lieutenant, bail out now." Lieutenant Harrington hesitated. He'd flown 37 missions with McAllister, sat in this seat beside him, trusted him, been trusted by him. "Sir, I can stay." "No." McAllister's voice was firm. "You can't help them fix their chutes. I need you to get out." "That's an order." Lieutenant Harrington unbuckled his harness. He looked at his pilot, his friend. "Charlie, go." McAllister said, "Tell my family I was thinking of them." Lieutenant Harrington went. He moved to the forward escape hatch, paused one last time, then jumped. Captain McAllister was alone at the controls now. Behind him, in the fuselage, 3 men were desperately working to fix their parachutes. Sergeant Martinez, the radio operator; Sergeant Romano, the ball turret gunner; Sergeant Johnson, one of the waist gunners; Sergeant Davies, the flight engineer, had stayed with them. He was helping them work the jammed static lines, trying spare chutes. Working frantically, the aircraft was at 5,000 feet, still descending. The controls were getting heavier as speed bled off. McAllister had to fight to keep the nose up, keep the wings level. If the aircraft went into a spin, the men in back would be thrown around. They'd never fix their chutes. 4,500 feet. "Davies, status," McAllister called. "Almost got it, Skipper. Martinez's chute is free. Romano and Johnson still jammed. We're working on it. 4,000 feet. The number to engine. Inboard left. Began sputtering, running out of fuel. When it quit, they'd be down to 2 engines on the left wing only. The aircraft would be almost impossible to control." "Davies, you need to go now." "Not yet, sir. Almost got it. Romano's chute is good." "Johnson, come on. Come on." 3,500 feet. The mountains were visible below, the ground rising to meet them. Captain McAllister could see individual trees now. Valleys, a river, 3,000 feet. "Got it. Johnson's chute is good. We're bailing out. Skipper, go." Go now." In the back of the aircraft, Sergeant Davies made sure Martinez, Romano, and Johnson jumped, made sure their chutes deployed, made sure they were clear. Then he moved toward the hatch himself. "Skipper, everyone's out. Your turn. Get out. Now." Captain McAllister was at 2,500 feet, maybe less. The aircraft was shaking, wanting to fall out of the sky. He had seconds to make a decision. If he let go of the controls now, he might make it to the hatch, might get out, might survive. But he couldn't be sure. The aircraft was critically low. If it went into a dive or spin before he reached the hatch, he'd be trapped. And there was something else, something deeper. An understanding that had formed over 37 missions, over months of commanding these men, of being responsible for their lives. He'd given the order to bail out. He'd made sure they got out. That was his job, his responsibility, his duty, and in fulfilling that duty, he'd run out of time. "Davies, I'm not going to make it. Get clear of the aircraft." "Sir, you can still." "That's an order." "Sergeant, jump now. Get clear." Sergeant Davies jumped. His parachute deployed. He drifted away from the dying aircraft. Captain Charles McAllister was alone. The aircraft was at 1,500 feet. The ground was rushing up. The controls were barely responding. He could have panicked, could have abandoned the controls and tried to reach the hatch, knowing it was too late, could have spent his final seconds in desperate, hopeless struggle. He did in single quotes T. according to witnesses on the ground, Italian civilians who saw the aircraft's final moments. The B-24 remained under control until the end. The wings stayed level, the nose stayed up. The pilot was still flying his aircraft, still doing his job until the moment of impact. Troubles Aberwin came down in a mountain valley in northern Italy. The impact killed Captain McAllister instantly. 9 men survived. 9 men who bailed out before the crash. 9 men who walked away because their pilot stayed at the controls. 3 of those men, Martinez, Romano, and Johnson, survived because Captain McAllister gave them time to fix their parachutes. Because he stayed in that pilot's seat when he could have saved himself. Because he understood that command means responsibility. That leadership means sacrifice. That you don't leave your men behind. Captain Charles Brewster McAllister was 23 years old. He'd flown 38 missions. He brought his crew home 37 times. On the 38th mission, he saved 9 men and gave his own life doing it. Local Italian villagers reached the crash site within hours. They found Captain McAllister's body in the wreckage, still strapped into the pilot's seat. They buried him with respect in the local cemetery, marking his grave with a simple wooden cross. The surviving crew members were recovered over the next several days. Some were picked up by Allied forces. Others were helped by Italian partisans who guided them south to safety. All 9 survived the war. On April 21st, 1945, 3 days after the crash, a telegram arrived at the McAllister home in Uniontown, Pennsylvania. "The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret that your son, Captain Charles B. McAllister, has been reported killed in action." His mother received the telegram. She'd feared this moment since the day Charles left for training, had prayed for his safety every night, had hoped he'd be one of the lucky ones who came home. She kept his letters, every single one. She would read them sometimes in the years that followed to remember his voice, to remember the quiet, thoughtful boy who'd grown into a man she was proud of. Lieutenant James Harrington, the co-pilot who'd bailed out on Captain McAllister's orders, wrote to the McAllister family in May 1945. It was a difficult letter to write. He explained what happened, explained the jammed parachutes, explained the choice McAllister had made. He wrote, "Your son saved my life and the lives of 8 other men." He knew what staying at the controls meant. He knew he wouldn't make it out. He did it anyway. "I've flown with many pilots, but I never flew with anyone braver or more selfless than Charles. He was the finest officer and the finest man I've ever known." The letter concluded, "He told me to tell you he was thinking of you." Those were his last words to me. He was thinking of his family. Even then, he was thinking of others. Captain Charles McAllister was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for his actions on April 18, 1945. The citation noted his extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty and his supreme sacrifice in saving the lives of his crew members. In 1947, his family was also awarded the Purple Heart on his behalf. Recognizing that he'd been killed in action, the 9 surviving crew members never forgot what their pilot had done for them. They corresponded after the war. Some attended reunions. They'd talk about the missions they'd flown, the close calls they'd survived, and they'd always talk about Captain McAllister. Sergeant Anthony Romano, the ball-turret gunner whose jammed parachute had been one of the 3 that needed fixing, named his first son Charles. When asked why, he said simply, "Because Captain McAllister gave me the chance to have a family. The least I can do is make sure his name lives on." Sergeant Frank Martinez, the radio operator, visited the McAllister family in Pennsylvania in 1948. He wanted to meet them, to thank them, to tell them in person what their son had done. According to family accounts, he stood in their living room and said, "Your son was the best man I ever knew. I'm alive because of him. My children will grow up with a father because of him. I'll never forget that. Never." After the war, Captain McAllister's body was exhumed from the Italian cemetery and reinterred at the Sicily, Rome American Cemetery in Nettuno, Italy. It's one of the permanent American military cemeteries, maintained by the American Battle Monuments Commission. He rests there now, along with over 7,000 other American servicemen who died in the Italian campaign. His grave is marked with a white marble cross like all the others. His name, his rank, his date of death, a simple marker for a man who made an extraordinary choice. His family visited once in the 1950s. His mother, his father, his brother James. Robert Jr. had died in a mining accident in 1946. They stood at his grave and said goodbye properly. His mother placed flowers. His father saluted. James, who'd been 15 when Charles left for the war, stood silently and cried. They were proud of him, heartbroken, but proud. Over the years, the story of Captain McAllister's sacrifice became known beyond his crew. As the surviving crew members told their story at reunions, to their children, to historians, word spread. Here was a pilot who'd given his life for his men, who'd embodied the highest ideals of leadership and duty. In 1992, on the 50th anniversary of the 456th Bombardment Group's activation, a memorial was dedicated at the site of their old airfield in Italy. Among the names honored was Captain Charles B. McAllister. A plaque tells his story, tells what he did on April 18, 1945. Visitors to the memorial sometimes stop and read his story. Some are aviation enthusiasts, some are historians, some are just travelers passing through who are moved by what they read. And sometimes, very rarely, someone will be there who knew him, a surviving crew member, now elderly, returning to the place where his life was saved, or a family member, a niece or nephew, grandchild, come to see where their relatives served. The last surviving member of Trouble's Aberwin crew, Sergeant William Davies, the flight engineer who'd stayed to help fix the jammed parachutes, passed away in 2008. At the age of 88, before he died, he gave an interview to a local historian. He talked about the war, about the missions, about the crew, and inevitably about April 18th, 1945. People ask me if I think about it. He said, "If I think about that day, of course I do. Not a day goes by that I don't think about Captain McAllister, about what he did, about the choice he made. He could have saved himself. He had time, maybe, could have let go of the controls and tried to get out. But he knew that if he did, the plane would go into a dive, and the 3 men with jam chutes wouldn't make it. So he stayed. That's what leadership is. That's what duty means. You put your men first. You take care of them, even when it costs you everything." He was 23 years old. 23. I'm 88 now. I've lived a long life. Had a wife, children, grandchildren, dog, career, retirement, all the things that make a life worth living. I got to have all that because Captain McAllister stayed in that pilot's seat, because he chose us over himself. How do you repay that? How do you say thank you for a gift like that? You live a good life. You try to be worthy of the sacrifice. You remember, and you make sure others remember too. The mountains where Captain McAllister's aircraft went down are peaceful now. The war ended 78 years ago. The battlefields have become farmland and forests again. The world has moved on, but memory remains. In the United States Air Force today, young officers take the oath of commissioning. They swear to support and defend the Constitution, to bear true faith and allegiance, to discharge the duties of the office they're about to enter, and somewhere in their training, They learn about leaders like Captain Charles McAllister, officers who understood that command is a sacred trust, that the lives of the men and women under your command are your responsibility, that leadership sometimes requires the ultimate sacrifice. They learn that being an officer isn't about privilege or authority. It's about duty. It's about putting your people first. It's about understanding that the rank on your collar comes with a price, and sometimes that price is everything. Captain McAllister's name appears on memorials, in his hometown, at his cemetery, at the site of his old airfield. Each memorial is a promise. We remember. We will not forget what you did. We will not forget what you gave. But the truest memorial isn't carved in stone. It's carried in the hearts of the families who exist because he made his choice. The children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the 9 men who survived. Families who laugh and love and live because a young pilot from Pennsylvania understood what duty means. Sergeant Romano's son Charles, named for the pilot who saved his father, grew up hearing the story. He served in the Air Force himself, became a pilot, flew for 30 years. When he retired, he visited Captain McAllister's grave in Italy. He stood there and said thank you to a man he never met, but whose sacrifice had given him life. These ripples extend through time. Each life saved created other lives. Each person who survived because of Captain McAllister's choice went on to build families, to contribute to their communities, to make the world a little better. The mathematics of sacrifice are impossible to calculate. How many lives exist today because of one decision made at 6,000 feet on April 18th, 1945? We can't know the number, but we know the truth. One man's choice to stay when he could have left. One man's understanding that his crew's lives mattered more than his own. One man's willingness to pay the ultimate price. Charles Brewster McAllister was 23 years old, a quiet boy from a coal mining town who wanted to fly, who wanted to serve, who wanted to do something that mattered. He did. He flew 38 missions. He brought his crew home 37 times. On the 38th mission, when the aircraft was dying and his crew needed time to escape, he gave them that time. He stayed at the controls while they jumped to safety. And when he'd given them every second he could, when there was no time left for himself, he flew his broken aircraft into the mountains and died doing his duty. He was a son, a brother, a friend, an officer, a pilot, a leader. And in his final moments, he was all of these things at once. He was thinking of his family, as he'd told Lieutenant Harrington. He was taking care of his crew, as he'd done for months. He was doing his duty, as he'd sworn to do. There are no witnesses to his final seconds. No one knows what he was thinking as the ground rushed up to meet him. Was he afraid? Was he at peace? Did he think of home? Did he think of the men he'd saved? We can't know. We can only know what he did, and what he did tells us everything we need to know about who he was. In the Sicily-Rome American cemetery, under the Italian sun, Captain Charles McAllister rests among his fellow warriors. The marble cross that marks his grave is simple. It doesn't tell his story, doesn't explain what he did, but it doesn't need to, because his story lives on in the families who exist because of him, in the lessons taught to young officers, in the memory of those who knew him and those who've learned about him. He was 23 years old. He should have had a lifetime ahead of him, should have come home, married, had children, grown old, should have lived to tell his own story. Instead, he gave that lifetime away, traded it for 9 other lifetimes, made the calculation that every good commander makes, his life for theirs. And in making that choice, he became immortal, not in the sense of living forever, but in the sense of being forever remembered, forever honored, forever an example of what it means to lead, what it means to serve, what it means to sacrifice. Fair winds and following seas, Captain McAllister, your crew made it home. Your mission was accomplished. Your duty was fulfilled. You stayed at the controls until the end. You brought your men home one final time, and we will remember. We will always remember.